Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Daily Gwei Refuel, where I recap the latest news in the Ethereum ecosystem. I'm your host, Anthony Sassano, and today the 21st of June 2022. Alright everyone, let's get into it. So I put out a tweet today where I said, the dotcom bubble bursting did not kill the internet, the 2022 crash will not kill crypto. Now, obviously the markets have been weak, and I spoke about this yesterday, so I'm not going to rehash it here. But I think that, for me, one of the, key bottom signals that I look for is kind of like how many people are calling crypto dead. Now, not normally these calls come from outside the ecosystem. Obviously, like anyone not following crypto closely just thinks it's some kind of like speculative casino. They don't know about the fundamentals and the technology behind it and all that stuff, which sadly is kind of like the majority of people. So of course, to them, when the price crashes, they're going to say, oh, it's dead. Even though there's a long history, especially when it comes to Bitcoin, of people calling Bitcoin dead and it just bounces back stronger every time. But look, that's just kind of like the way it is right now. I think it gets less and less over time, but it's just kind of funny seeing the same pattern play out where like the mainstream media and people who you don't really follow crypto will say, well, crypto's dead, Bitcoin's dead, Ethereum's dead, blah, 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 right? Obviously, that's not true. And the funny thing is that kind of like the crypto market cycles typically get compared to the dot-com bubble of the late 90s, right? The internet, kind of like a speculative internet bubble that actually went a lot higher, inflation adjusted, than any crypto bubble has gone. I think by about 3x-ish or something. I think the total market cap of dot-com companies, I guess internet companies, before it exploded, inflation adjusted was about 10 trillion. The crypto total market cap before it crashed was 3 trillion, and now we're at about a trillion. So obviously much bigger than what we've seen in crypto, but still the same kind of like principle of, in the internet, kind of like in the early internet era, there was all this promise, the internet was going to do this, was going to do that, everything was going to be amazing, blah, 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 right? And obviously all this hype and all this mania and this speculative activity got ahead of the fundamentals at the time. Like so many of the things that were, I guess, like envisioned back then came true, but just much later. Like there wasn't kind of like, for example, YouTube didn't take off until, well, it didn't come to be till like 2004, 2005, I think. And then it really still took a while to kind of like take off and meet and reach the expectations that everyone had for something like YouTube. Same with social media, and obviously the advent of smartphones really accelerated the internet's growth. But up until, the funny thing is, up until like, I guess the smartphone era, most people still weren't really using the internet for anything kind of, I guess, like social, right? There was kind of like some online games that you would do, and there was some social media, but it was a lot of people were just getting exposed to the internet as part of like their work, right? Obviously the workplaces were moving towards that, but then smartphones came, and literally as time went on over the next few years, everyone was exposed to the internet, and that I would say that the internet became ubiquitous in people's lives, and most people's lives around the world, probably in the early 2010s. Right? It took that long. And you can always go back and kind of like see, okay, when did the internet kind of quote unquote officially start? Did it start all the way back in kind of like the 40s with the not the Turing machine, with the experiments that were being run back then, with the communication experiments during World War II, or was it ARPANET, or did it come when Tim Berners-Lee invented the World Wide Web? There's obviously arguments about that. And that's kind of like, I guess, orthogonal to this and related to a tweet that I want to talk about in a sec. But it's the same thing with crypto. There's always a lot of speculative mania around all of this stuff, all of these ideas. They never really amount to anything. And that doesn't mean that they're not going to amount to anything in the future, but always the speculation gets ahead of where the technology is today. And we saw that with the gas fees on Ethereum being really, really high, block space demand just going through the roof. So many things weren't even able to be built because they just couldn't be built on layer 1 Ethereum. They tried to find homes elsewhere, but pretty much none of this technology is ready for mass adoption in terms of being able to scale there. We're getting there, but it's still very, very early. I know that's a meme to say that as well. But it's true. We're still very early in the technological arc of crypto. It's going to be decades for this sort of stuff to play out the way we kind of like envision that we want it to play out. And this is and that's a kind of a good segue into Fred Ehrsam's tweet here. He's a co-founder at Paradigm, where he said, one thing most people don't fully grasp, it takes years, often decades, to go from a new infrastructure level technology breakthrough like crypto to a vibrant ecosystem of mainstream applications. And you can see here he's actually done what I just said kind of like regarding the internet in another tweet, where he followed up and said, the internet breakthroughs timeline ranges from 1969 to basically today. So, we're 28 to 53 years in, depending on your start date for the internet. Obviously, crypto, happens a lot faster. Crypto infrastructure isn't a hardware rollout. It's more of a software rollout. There is some hardware aspect to it, but like in a proof of stake world, the hardware, at least for Ethereum, is collapsed, right? The hardware requirements. But in terms of like hardware rollout, I'm more talking about with the internet, there was a massive infrastructure rollout that needed to happen all through the world. Like cables, like literal like cables needed to be laid from country to country, from nation to nation, sometimes under the ocean, or a lot of the time at the bottom of the ocean to connect these places. And then you had all the cell phone towers and kind of like internet towers, all this sort of stuff. Like there was a massive infrastructure rollout that needed to happen, and that took a while. Whereas crypto has the advantage that we don't really kind of need that. We just piggyback off of the internet, and the only infrastructure in terms of kind of like hardware really is miners, but and then obviously the hardware to kind of put your staking validators on as well. So it's going to be a lot less time. But if you take crypto as starting in 2009, we're 13 years in. But I've explained this on the refill before. I don't think that's actually a good start date for crypto. I think that Bitcoin in 2009 was like ARPANET in 1969. Now, as I said, crypto works on kind of like faster timescales here. If I had to say where we were on this kind of like timeline, I would say maybe early 90s. Like TCP/IP was 82. I would say Ethereum was the crypto's TCP/IP moment. So we're further along there, but now we're trying to scale it, right? We're trying to build usable applications, trying to build things that appeal to people. And that's where we have the early 90s here with HTML and web browsers. So I really do think that if I had to, I would say early 90s in terms of development here. So like as I said, the early 2010s is when I believe the internet really became ubiquitous worldwide. So we still have a long kind of like journey ahead of us, and it may only take us 10 years instead of 20, for example. But that's still 10 years. Like a lot can change. Crypto works really, really quickly and runs really, really quickly. So that's kind of like how I think about all of this. And during all of that, we're going to have boom and bust cycles. We have had boom and bust cycles since crypto basically has existed, and we're going to have that forever, I think. And they'll get kind of like, I guess, more mature over time. I think they'll get less volatile over time, at least for the things that are actually working and succeeding, like Ethereum, for example. But the thing is, I think what people do and what they make a mistake with is that they look at applications, and the applications are down 90, 95+%, and they think, wow, okay, I'm going to buy these things because they're down so much, and they're still good projects. But they don't actually do their research into them. Like a lot of them aren't good projects. A lot of them are dead projects. And just as I've mentioned plenty of times on the refill before, most projects will fail, and that's okay. Like that's not a bad thing. That's just literally how it works. Just like most businesses in real life fail. But in terms of the arc of, I guess, adoption for crypto, I would say that it's still going to take us at least another decade to get to a point where we can basically start doing, mass kind of like mainstream adoption where crypto can be integrated with everything. Because right now we're just nowhere near that. Like as much as we're scaling right now, and as much as kind of like we love all the layer twos, the layer two, I mean, okay, even if you kind of like take the charitable interpretation of a layer two and you say like a Validium is a layer two, which technically it isn't. Right. Or you say something like, you just say anything that stores data off chain can be like, is a layer two, which technically it isn't, but let's just for the sake of argument, those things haven't been tested even at like their quoted TPS. Some of them quote 9, 10,000 TPS. They haven't been tested at that, and not even anywhere near from what I've seen. So, and the thing is that 9, 10,000 TPS is nowhere near enough to host kind of like the world in a mainstream fashion. I mean, like there's always a lot of comparisons made to Visa, which does like 40,000 transactions per second. But Visa is such a basic application. It's a payments network. Ethereum is so much more than a payments network, and the layer twos are so much more, like the generalized ones at least, are so much more than payments networks. So we will probably require millions of TPS one day, sustained TPS. And I think we'll get there, but we're nowhere close to there today. The technology still needs to improve, still needs to be built out. People still need to kind of like use it, build it, and adopt it. So when I kind of like look at what's happening with the crypto markets, I'm just like, oh well, we once again got ahead of where we were in terms of the technology. And we'll be back eventually, but that's just what happens. The speculative manias always play out like that. Now, I actually don't think the last bull market we had was our dotcom. I think it needs to be much bigger than that. Like, honestly, I was very young when the dot-com bubble happened, but I've read the history on it. Like, I think when it burst, I was like 8 or 9 years old. So I didn't experience any of it. Obviously, I wasn't old enough to pay much attention to it, but I've read my history on it. And the dot-com bubble was so pervasive, so perverse, so, I guess, spread out in kind of like modern society, especially in the US, is that it's literally all that anyone could talk about wherever you went. Now, we only have that in crypto towards like the very end, and it's not everyone. It's kind of like, select people. Like if you're already in crypto, your family members may ask about it, but it's not like people who are just not in crypto at all start talking about it in like a massive wave, and it doesn't just become like everything everyone talks about. We had some pockets of that maybe with NFTs sometimes within crypto, but I think it was still a much smaller scale than what the dot-com bubble was. So I think maybe next cycle we could have that, but again, like it's just inconsequential. I don't think it's something worth focusing too much on. I think if you just think of these things as, we go through speculative cycles. Each speculative cycle leads to better technology, better kind of like rollout. We get closer to the goal of having ubiquitous crypto adoption. That's all that matters at the end of the day. At least that's all that matters to me. All right, so speaking of, I guess, like rolling out more of the technology, we now have Sepolia Beacon chain live. So the Sepolia Beacon chain needed to be spun up because we're going to be merging that with the existing Sepolia execution layer or proof of work chain. So there, you can see there's a tweet here from Terrence who's syncing the Sepolia testnet with Prism and Geth, and he's going to be trying other combos here, client combos here as well. So this is kind of like, I guess, the state of the merge right now. We're working towards that I guess like next public testnet merge, which I think I read a date that it's kind of like scheduled for the 29th of June, which is the same day as the Grey Glacier hard fork on the execution layer. So I don't know if that date's going to change. I kind of find it weird that that's happening on the same day. I don't think it should, just because it kind of like feels like there's going to be split attention. But if it does, I mean, you guys know, as I said, I'm going to be hosting a call with ETHstaker to watch that live, just like the last call for Ropsten was hosted by ETHstaker. So there'll be more details on that as we get closer to that date. But yeah, just wanted to kind of, I guess, highlight here that the Sepolia Beacon chain is now live, and just, it's ready. Well, it will be ready soon for the merge, which is the next public testnet being merged. And then after that, we have Girly. So we're close, guys. Merge is coming, as I always say, very, very close right now. All right, so speaking of staking, Superphiz had an interesting tweet today where he said, in all seriousness, the falling price of ETH is a new opportunity for normal people to stake from home. This decentralizes and strengthens the network for all users, and you get a pretty fair reward for the work. Obviously, even at these prices, like say ETH is $1,000, it still costs $32,000 to kind of like stake on your own, to solo stake, unless you're using something like a rocket pool. But I'm talking about like a pure solo stake on your own, not using any of these other services. It costs $32,000. Now, that's a lot for most people to kind of like, I guess, outlay for staking, or for kind of like anything, especially because ETH is a volatile instrument, and we don't know if this is the bottom. We don't know if it's going to go lower than what it is now. But I think that it's still kind of a high barrier, but it's much lower than it was. Obviously, when ETH was over $4,000, that cost was much, much higher. So I think that we've still expanded the pool of people that can get involved with solo staking and made it probably easier for people to work their way up to that as well. Like, there's a lot of people who won't just buy 32 ETH from the get-go. They'll work their way up to it over time, whether that's because they're waiting to get paid so they can put a bit of their paycheck into ETH every now and again. And I think that because we're in a bear market, there's going to be plenty of opportunities to keep buying ETH for a long while at kind of like maybe more of these depressed prices, and it just kind of gives more people opportunity to stack that 32 ETH to spin up their validator. And as you guys know, that's one of the things that I do when, that's pretty much the main thing I do when stack ETH is I count it as validators. Like, I always work towards trying to stack another validator because that's what I care about most. I care about staking within Ethereum, and obviously it's much easier to do when ETH is $1,000 instead of $4,000. And I, as I said, I think that these prices may last a little while if we stay in a bear market, which just makes it all the more easier because it gives people more time to stack that required ETH amount. So if that's you, I mean, as I've been saying, like, it's a blessing that ETH came down this far because it means it makes it easier for you to kind of like enter into that arena and be a solo staker. Because I think that any true Ethereum, if they can, should work towards being a solo staker. But if you can't get there for one reason or another, as I said, it's still a large outlay. Even over time, that's still a large outlay. You still have other options that are online today and more coming online in the future. Obviously, I mentioned Rocket Pool, but there's a bunch of them out there, and I'm sure there's going to be more in the future as well. So it's just the perfect time to stack the ETH required, or any ETH, like at the end of the day, to kind of like stake within the Ethereum Beacon chain, I think. All right, so one last thing I got to do with staking. So there's a staking node operator's request for product that has just been posted. So the Ethereum Foundation is looking for proposals request for proposals, I should say, not request for product. The Ethereum Foundation is looking for proposals to build technical staking node operator documentation. So submissions are expected by July 8th, and DMs are open. James's DMs here are open if you have questions. So you can read this for more details on what this basically is about. And kind of like from a high level, the diversity of staking operators is critical to Ethereum, aiding in both decentralization and security. Today, there are roughly only 60 to 100 staking providers capable of running staking operations at scale. A number of new pools and staking groups are emerging in this space, but there is a lack of resources to give a high-level overview of the different options available in running staking operations. So if that sounds like something you'd be interested in putting together and working with the Ethereum Foundation on, you should have to definitely check this out. I'll link it in the YouTube description, and you can decide if you want to, I guess, put forward a proposal here. So speaking of proposals, so applications for the next Ethereum Foundation Fellowship Program cohort are open now. So you can kind of visit this blog post that was shared by AA here. There's kind of like details about what this is, and with a roundup of kind of like the first cohort and how that went there. So if you're interested in this, I'll link in the YouTube description as well. But just more ways to get involved with Ethereum, which I always will support, of course. All right, so Trent Van Epps today highlighted here, or gave a shout out here to Gitcoin for organizing a dedicated ETH infrastructure matching pool as part of grants round 14, which is currently still on, I believe. So definitely make your donations if you haven't yet. Again, that's just my reminder for you guys. But this kind of like ETH infra matching pool was generously funded by $500,000 from Coinbase, Yearn, and Polygon. So you can support ETH infra from this link, which I'll link in the YouTube description below. And basically what this includes is all the public good stuff that we kind of like all know and love, such as staking, staking related things, such as some of ESAT staking guides, ETH Staker, the different client teams like Nethermind and Nimbus, Lighthouse, Prolabs. Like there's a bunch of grants here basically in this collection, which you can kind of donate to all at once if you would like. So very, very awesome to see this. Very awesome to see these teams getting some public goods funding here, and I hope they continue to do so. All right, so this came across my timeline today. I don't know if I'd heard of this protocol before. It rang a bell, but I just saw it again today. It's called Timeless Finance, and it launched on Ethereum mainnet today. And they describe themselves as a yield market protocol that lets you boost, hedge, and trade yield. So I think there's a few of these already that exist on Ethereum today. So this is just another one that enters the fray here. And they describe themselves as permissionless. You do not need permission from anyone to use any part of Timeless. It's immutable, so the code can never be arbitrarily modified, even by the team, which is actually pretty unique because there are a lot of contracts or a lot of projects on Ethereum that are not immutable. They have multi-sigs admin keys for one reason or another. So it's interesting to see that Timeless Finance here has opted for immutable contracts from the get-go, and they're composable. Uses obviously the common standards such as ERC20s and ERC4626, and can be fit into other protocols with kind of like money Legos here. So you can go to timelessfi.com to try this out, and you can read more about it at the blog post here about the kind of like mainnet launch, which of course I'll link in the YouTube description below. I don't know too much about this protocol myself. I only saw it just before, and I just kind of like wanted to highlight it for you guys. But cool to see another protocol launching on Ethereum. It's always good to see, I guess, like even though it's not totally unique, as we've got protocols like this or that already exist on Ethereum, it's always good to see more competition in whatever the kind of like space is here. So really, really cool to see this. All right, so Astaria announced today that they have raised $8 million in a seed round with a bunch of different investors here. Disclosure, I'm an angel investor in Astaria. So this is kind of like, this platform is led by Justin Bram, who you may know from his YouTube channel, where he does a bunch of kind of like DeFi guides. I've talked about him before, and I think he's popped his head into the Daily Gwei Discord before, and he's the CEO. And also Joseph DeLong, formerly the CTO of SushiSwap here. So what is Astaria? Well, basically it's a money market for JPEGs or for NFTs, and it should be available to the public by September here. And the round kind of like included a bunch of well-known investors such as True Ventures, Ethereal Ventures, Wintermute, the Lao, and a bunch of others, as well as kind of like angels, which I don't think are listed here, but there are a bunch of angels on the cap table here. So This is really cool. I'm pretty excited to back these guys. Like, I think Justin has been doing a lot of amazing work within the crypto community for a while now, within the Ethereum community for a while now, especially around education. And I think that that Joe has had long history within Ethereum. You know, he worked on core protocol stuff. He's been in Ethereum for a while. Then obviously worked with SushiSwap on the DeFi stuff. So I'm interested to see kind of like what he does with Astaria here and how he can kind of like add value to this as well. So two, I think, strong people leading this this team here, and I'm definitely excited to see what they do. As I said before, I am an investor in them as well. So take what I say with a grain of salt. If you want to kind of get more information on this, you can visit the CoinDesk article here, but you can also visit Astaria's I guess like website as well, which should be linked somewhere, I think, or maybe the website isn't live just yet. But you can go to their Twitter page to learn more about this here. All right, so just an update on the Bancor situation. So this, I guess, like a Twitter account called Fully Allocated put together a summary thread about it, which I'll link in the YouTube description. You can go read it. But I wanted to focus on one tweet from this thread, which basically said that where this Fully Allocated account says, "This whole situation has reinforced my skepticism in upgradable proxies." So what they're basically saying here is that there are proxy contracts that exist, smart contracts that exist for a lot of these, I guess, protocols on Ethereum or on any network really, and they can be upgradable, which means they can be changed by, I guess, like maybe token holders or just the admins themselves or the team themselves. And then Fully Allocated continues by saying, Bancor upgraded their contracts to disable withdrawals right before their announcement so nobody could react. It completely breaks the trust and immutability promise of smart contracts. So basically what Bancor did here was they rugged their entire community because they added a function, from my understanding here, as by upgrading their contracts to disable withdrawals. And they did this before they announced that they were doing this. So that is really bad in my eyes. I think this is like a deal breaker for anyone, to be honest. Like, I don't think you should be using Bancor after this. Like, I know some people kind of like have kind of come at me in the comments from my in the YouTube comments for what I said about Bancor, but guys, like, this is like the cardinal sin here. Like, you don't do this. This isn't DeFi. This is CeFi. Like, it's not even CeFi, as I said yesterday. I think it's more like TradFi. They really did just kind of like break the trust and immutability promise of smart contracts here, and they broke that social contract with their community. You can't just say, oh, we're going to do this, and then this being kind of like the impermanent loss protection with with kind of like the BNT tokens, and then when the going gets tough because you didn't design the reward program correctly or didn't design the protocol correctly, you literally rug all of your users at once, and then you only tell them after you've kind of like done that. You don't even give them a warning or a way out. There's no exit here. So that to me is not DeFi at all. This goes against everything that I like about DeFi, and I would bucket Bancor very much in the CeFi, if not kind of pretty much TradFi bucket at this stage. But look, you can use whatever you want. At the end of the day, if you still trust Bancor, that's on you. But I personally do not trust them. I haven't trusted them since 2017, actually, since their ICO. Because for those who don't know, they also rugged the ICO investors too. Because originally they had a, I guess, like cap on how many people could put money into the ICO, and then I think halfway through the ICO they raised that cap because they're like, oh my god, there's so much demand, we're going to raise it. And they did that because they wanted more money, and they actually raised a lot of money back in their 2017 ICO. So this is not a thing that they've done just kind of like for the first time. This is a culture thing at Bancor, and it makes me incredibly bearish on them. You know, I was already bearish on them, but it makes me just even more bearish on them. And honestly, if anyone kind of like comes at me and says I'm only saying this because I'm a Uniswap maxi, not at all. Like, this has got nothing to do with Uniswap or competing AMMs. This is, I would say, the same thing if Uniswap did this. This has got to do with respecting what DeFi is and not rugging your community by literally disabling withdrawals before you even tell them what was happening, right? I just think it goes against everything that we should be promoting within DeFi. All right, so an announcement from ZigZag Exchange today. They're going to be doing a token. Now, I don't think anyone is surprised by this announcement at all. I'm certainly not. As I said, like, my golden rule is that everything will do a token eventually, except the Daily Gwei, of course. But they basically put together this thread that goes over the details about how their airdrop is going to work, how they're going to be doing an IDO, and how the formation of the ZigZag DAO is going to go. Now, from my reading, I guess like there's a bit of controversy around this. One, because they're doing an IDO, which I guess not a lot of protocols do these days. They just do the airdrop and then the token's free floating and then people can go I guess trade it on the open market, but they're doing an IDO, and they also haven't decided how they're doing their airdrop yet. They're going to leave it up to the community, and I think they're especially going to leave it up to people who contribute to the IDO. So it does feel a little bit weird that they're going about it this way. Hopefully they kind of like listen to community feedback and maybe adjust a few things here. But I still like, you know, ZigZag the product. I've talked about them before, and I use them pretty regularly because they're on ZK Sync, and I use them to kind of like swap the donations from Gitcoin into ETH, and it's worked well. Like, there's nothing wrong with the product, but I think that, yeah, I'm not really a huge fan of IDOs or ICOs or any of that, like all token sales in general. I think a lot of them really are just poorly designed. They don't really lead to positive outcomes, especially positive long-term outcomes. And I don't think the airdrop procedure should be left up to the community to decide, because the community is always going to try and decide to give themselves the most tokens that they can. So why would you leave it up to them? Like, it should be a thing that the core team comes up with, in my mind. At least that's my opinion. Maybe you have a different opinion to me, but I don't think that the community should be designing how many tokens they get, because of course they're going to try and vote for the most amount of tokens to give themselves the most amount of tokens. That's just like the clear incentive structure there. At least it is in my eyes. But if you disagree with me, let me know. But yeah, we'll see how this goes. We'll see how this evolves. But yeah, ZigZag is going to have a token. So that's basically the big announcement that they were kind of like teasing, I think, over the last few days. All right, so I want to talk about this tweet for a sec that I kind of like put out when I replied to this I think it's Jaeger is how you say his name. He basically put out a tweet where he said, of all the things that happened this cycle, Solana's vote to confiscate a user's funds is by far the most egregious. It's worse even than the ETH DAO confiscation. It's the clearest demonstration yet that proof of stake is not a consensus mechanism. Okay, and then I replied, and I said, it was Solend, an application built on Solana, not the Solana protocol itself. And then I asked him, is it worse than the Bitcoin value overflow bug, which you should actually check out, because a lot of people don't know about this bug, but it happened very early on in Bitcoin's life in 2010. But it was basically Bitcoin forking out a inflation bug, which kind of like broke Bitcoin's immutability, but no one ever talks about that because, of course, Bitcoiners don't want to talk about that little thing there. And then I said, what happened with Solend has nothing to do with proof of stake. Do more research before spouting off so much bullshit. And people replied to this saying, you know, quite an achievement to tweet something so factually incorrect to make Sassal defend Solana. And look, I get it was weird because this kind of like reads like I'm defending Solana. But in reality, I'm just correcting misinformation because that's what I do. And it doesn't matter if it's Solana or kind of like Cardano or Avalanche or whatever else it is. If it's misinformation, and then especially if it's misinformation that kind of like relates back to Ethereum, I kind of like feel compelled to correct it. But I want to focus on where he said it's the clearest demonstration yet that proof of stake is not a consensus mechanism. Like, what the fuck even is that? Like, I read that and I'm like, dude, like, do you have a brain? Like, seriously, no one with like a normal rational thinking brain would type a sentence like that. But anyway, that's my own kind of like view on that. But then I said, what happened with Solend has nothing to do with proof of stake, which it doesn't. But then you can kind of like extend that to Ethereum and some other kind of like bad narratives that I've seen perpetuate where people think that proof of stake equals on-chain governance, when that is not how it works at all. There are two separate things. There are proof of stake blockchains that have on-chain governance, such as Tezos. Then there are proof of stake blockchains that do not have on-chain governance, such as Ethereum, right? Like, or the Beacon chain specifically. And Ethereum will never have on-chain governance. Well, I shouldn't say never, but like it's not even on the roadmap. It's not something that we want in Ethereum, for a variety of different reasons. But Bitcoiners, especially Bitcoin maximalists, keep perpetuating this myth that, you know, after the merge, Ethereum on proof of stake is going to be an on-chain governable system, which is hilarious to me because it's just the goalpost moving yet again. Because first it was proof of stake is never happening, then it was the merge never happening, or then it was it's always being delayed, then it was ETH2 is never happening. Now it's, okay, now they're accepting, okay, well the merge is going to happen, but like once Ethereum's on proof of stake, it's going to be a on-chain governance system, and it's going to be just like the banks and all this other crap that goes on. So I wasn't necessarily defending Solana here as much as I was dunking on this Yago guy and the misinformation that he's spreading here. But at the end of the day, I think being accurate is also kind of something that is worthy of doing, even if it's for a competing ecosystem. You guys know my opinion on Solana. I don't have to rehash it there. But I don't want people kind of like saying that it was just, you know, this is the kind of like Solana protocol doing this when it wasn't, because it was just an application. Because that misinformation actually leads to people thinking, well, Ethereum's going to do this. It's just like the Ethereum kind of like DAO hack and what happened there. And then it's just really the applications doing that. Like it actually just perpetuates those bad narratives and perpetuates all that really bad information. So that's why I kind of like said this here. Now, I know I don't need to justify myself or anything like this, but I just feel like some people were confused by this tweet and I wanted to explain my reasoning here. And I wanted to explain why just because it's misinformation for a competing ecosystem doesn't mean it shouldn't be corrected. Like I always try to be as accurate as I can in both my critiques and my kind of like praise for competing ecosystems, because I am an educator and that's what I do. Like I don't want to be a propagandist. I want to be an educator. Propagandists don't care about accuracy. They just say whatever they want, whatever suits their narrative. I try my hardest to stick to the facts, and if I don't, people can call me out on it, and I'm very receptive to that. So yeah. Anyway, I'm going to leave that at that. Last couple of things to get through. So BlockFi. I've been talking about BlockFi a little bit recently and about how they were having some troubles there. Well, Zach Prince, who is the CEO of BlockFi, announced today that BlockFi has signed a term sheet with FTX to secure a $250 million revolving credit facility, providing BlockFi with access to capital that further bolsters BlockFi's balance sheet and platform strength. AKA, BlockFi is being bailed out by FTX. This is BlockFi signaling to everyone that they aren't strong enough to meet all of their obligations. So they need to work with FTX in order to have this credit facility to keep their operations going. And this is hilarious because I think they were relying on their raise that I spoke about the other day, where they were kind of like trying to raise at a much higher valuation to raise that money and to keep them afloat. But now that they can't do that, they need to kind of like find money elsewhere. Again, this is another perfect example of a CeFi platform that we have absolutely no window into. We don't know what's happening behind the scenes. There's no way to verify anything. All we have is signals and rumors that we can go off of. And well, we only find out when that they're struggling when announcements like this happen. Like, how long was Celsius in trouble for? Probably a very long time. How long did it take for us to learn about it? Very long time. We only heard about it a few weeks ago. Obviously I had been warning about it for a while, but we only heard about it, or at least most people only heard about it when shit really hit the fan. That's not the same for DeFi, where we can actually order all of these sorts of things and see on chain. Like, how long were people screaming about the Terra thing? A very long time, since basically day one, because they were saying that, look, we can see how this is going to work. Everything's laid out bare. We see all the on-chain stuff. We see what's going to happen. This is the logical conclusion of that. So even the most egregious example of something that has collapsed and taken a lot of the ecosystem with it was able to be spotted because it was on-chain. It was verifiable, which is a far cry from these CeFi platforms, which you just have no window into at all. All right, finally here, just a quick shout out there as part of the merge series that I'm doing with SSV Network. The next episode will be, or next Twitter Spaces will be on Friday at 9 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time. I think that is going to be early morning, very early morning in the US. I think it's going to be around noon in Europe. It's going to be recorded, of course, so you can kind of catch the recording. But this episode is going to be with Stani from Aave, and we're going to be talking about the merger's impact on DeFi. So you can go set a reminder for these Twitter Spaces. But if you can't catch it, you can definitely kind of like re-listen to the recording once that's live, which I think it automatically uploads to Twitter after the Twitter Spaces is done. So yeah, be sure to catch that. But I think on that note, it's going to be it for today. So thank everyone for listening and watching. Be sure to subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet. Give the video a thumbs up, subscribe to the newsletter, join the Discord channel, and I'll catch you all tomorrow. Thanks everyone.